anime face. And hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dale. Welcome back to the next episode of the Reformed Roundtable. As you can tell by the title, we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic. I'll say that, a topic that garners a lot of responses to it on dead denominations. Like, what does it mean for a denomination to be dead, or how does a denomination die, or anything like that. So before we get into today's topic, let us introduce ourselves. I am the one, the only Captain Calvinist. I am the owner of this YouTube channel, but I am not the owner. I am not the only owner of the podcast Reformed Roundtable. You have with me my co-host Dale Jutsu. If you want to find me, you can find me anywhere on any social media platform with the name Captain Calvinist, with the exception of Facebook.
What are you on Facebook, Dennis?
I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's right there.
Very nice.
Yes.
Yes, I am Dale Waters, his ever-present co-host, and I can be found at Dale Jitsu on TikTok and technically Twitter and Instagram.
You're on Twitter?
I am. You can find some great throwbacks of me arguing about Bible contradictions in the comment sections of a John Jones tweet. So, classics.
All right. So, again, before we get into today's super big topic, I want to kind of touch on this a bit about the video that we saw yesterday of that one guy talking about wrong prophecy. I'm sorry, I had to throw you a curveball. I didn't want to tell you everything, but one thing that's like very apparent we have to learn about the Bible is that at no point is the Bible written by military tacticians, and this should give people kind of like a direction that we're going towards. It's not meant for it. It wasn't meant to be read like that. It wasn't meant to be read like a war. So I think what this gentleman originally was he a atheist?
No, he would identify as a Christian. I believe he teaches at a Bible college and a seminary.
Okay, so he might have just been bringing these up as kind of like questions for people to think about.
Well, do I think he's a believer is a completely different question, but that's not what you asked.
Oh, do you think he's a believer?
Do I?
Do you?
In any case,
okay.
So he's not someone who would claim to be an unbeliever. I think we can say that with confidence.
Okay. So kind of like the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, we'll see.
Damn it, Dale! Stop being a Baptist for once and actually take a stance on something.
Well, see, the issue is I might take too much of a stance and split the church over the carpet. That's the real danger there. No, well, and I think not to get too close to our main topic, but I think there's issues of, can you technically be wrong on something and still be a Christian? Yes, but if you're wrong in that area, that tends to lead down this slope of suddenly what is God? So I don't know what he thinks about the true essentials of the faith. I'm not brimming with confidence, but on the other hand, I could say, well, he may think the Bible has a ton of contradictions in there, but he has not rejected it. So we'll see.
That, or he just has like one of the most interesting views on it, where he simultaneously says it's right and it's wrong.
Yeah, but he's
could be one of those people.
It is the Bible is a mess, and that's okay. God uses messy people and messy things.
Okay.
Yeah. So can I say the name of the channel?
You can, if people want to go look at it.
The TikTok channel is ABH Bible. The guy's name is Aaron. I don't know his last name, but I think it's worth Christians looking at and listening to and seeing how he's going through it. And either you'll hear it and kind of know how to respond, or you won't, and you can learn your Bible better. So no downsides there.
Yep, and that That gave us the conversation that we had last night at 12 in the morning.
I'm paying for that still at my age.
Well, I'm not. I went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Dennis, I work for a living. I wear a tie.
Okay.
Right? I don't want to hear it.
Oh, yes. You dress professionally and sit at a desk for how long?
That's irrelevant. I wake up every
To
day.
make-
And people are counting on me to put food on the table, and that people is me. So, yes.
I don't. Okay, just go to a McDonald's. $1 menu, baby.
Dollar menu, yes. Well, my biggest expense is rent, actually, by far.
Really?
Well, I don't live that. I've got this lovely screen behind me. That's not that expensive.
Yeah.
Like I rent's my big expense, and then probably like food or something. I mean, I do the occasional anime convention, and that's like a big spending day. But I was thinking about going to WrestleMania next year, but I don't think I'm going to be able to swing it time wise just because I have stuff. But if they do one in Philly the year after, I might go to that.
I might go to that too because Philadelphia is close to Vermont.
Well, if you do go and I do go, we should definitely meet up.
Yes, and have an actual round table with a round table.
Yeah, you could finally visit me.
Yes,
Dennis,
I can finally
really
go.
short in your life. I'm just worried, like I'm gonna find you and you're gonna be like very small, like unhealthily skinny, and really short.
I'm 130 pounds.
How tall are you, Dennis?
5'7".
Are you taller than your significant other?
Yes.
Okay.
My significant other is about 5'4", 5'6". No, 5'5".
7, 130. I was probably there at one point in my life. So funny thing, my weight was my age with a 0 at the end for like a number of years, like clockwork.
260 pounds, Dale?
Yeah, right. But yeah, let's see. So it was that way like throughout I think middle school and into my like second year of high school. And then I bumped above it, then went below it, and then I bumped way above it because my heaviest was 265 when I was like 23. No, maybe it was 27. No, it was 276. 276 when I was 23. And then I went back down to like 250 and then like 225 to 215, which is where I am.
Oh God, I am terribly scared that I am like 2 feet shorter than you.
I'll send you a video of Chonky Dale at some point.
Chonky Dale?
I wasn't even that big. Well, I looked big, but like I wasn't like rotund. I was just.
You weren't a bowling ball.
No. Like I was definitely like you could see the weight on me, but I was not.
Okay.
I'm 6'2", so I'm
okay.
Like,
You're a lot taller than me. Yeah. That's not an accomplishment.
I mean,
Anyway, so getting to today's topic. What brought on today's topic was actually a TikTok I saw the other day. That kind of it really got to me because I don't like the reasons why he says it.
You don't like an uppity Baptist.
No, I don't. Because he says it for for what I believe is the stupidest reason in the world.
What was the stupidest reason in the world, Dennis? Tell us.
On the sole basis that the Presbyterian Church is Calvinist.
Frozen, chosen, dead,
Oh, well. No, so for those who don't know, Pastor B, IFB, or whatever he calls himself on TikTok, made a video the other day about essentially the Presbyterian Church being dead, the Methodist Church being dead. I don't really have a problem with that one though, and the Anglican Church being dead. Though I guess it kind of depends on what Anglican Church and what Methodist Church you're talking about. Because in some Methodist churches, they're a lot closer to IFB than what he thinks. Other than baptized babies.
No. Yeah, I
mean,
mean, yeah, it's so it was Presbyterian, Methodist, and was there another one he named?
Anglicans.
Anglican. Well, there's Anglicans and there's Anglicans, Dennis.
There are Anglicans, then there are Anglicans.
Well, it's funny. One of my best friends from college is Anglican, and he was previously his church was part of the Episcopate or diocese. I don't know, but he's part of the Episcopal Church. They left because basically they thought the church was liberalizing too much. Joined the Anglican Church, but the Episcopal Church basically like took their land and their built, which is basically like a PCA, PCUSA scenario, but they were somehow able to rent their stuff back from them, which was always a sore spot. And he was, occasionally very saddened when it was only the African bishops that were, keeping people in check at the communions.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, like the actual Church of England,
It's not the actual Church of England is kind of
well, what is it? John Shelby Sprong, the Archbishop of New Jersey, which sounds kind of hilarious. But he's a very unorthodox, we'll say.
Well, I would. Unorthodox is a very, very, very windy way of saying it.
Yes. So, yes. What's on the docket now?
So right now on the docket is why would we think Pastor B would say things like these? Like what's the motivation behind it other than maybe just to make it one quick 1-minute video in the middle of Scotland as what was traditionally a Presbyterian church with some of the most important figures to the Reformation and to the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah, I mean, so
I felt it was very tacky.
Well, I mean, it's TikTok, man. Have you seen our videos? I think that there could, I think there is truth that a lot of the mainstream denominations are very disappointing, and particularly in Europe, sort of the historically Christian countries are very much not Christian, and so a lot of the times the church, as a whole, what have historically been churches have sort of become social clubs, well-wisher clubs, even false religion, or at the very least, very, very lukewarm, one might say, dead. And so I think it could make sense to be looking holistically at so the Scottish Presbyterian Church, or even just English Paedo-Baptist, which would probably take all three of the groups he was talking about and say, well, they don't really seem as a whole to be that devout. Now, there's exceptions to this, both Paedo and Credo. There's some very serious Anglicans, there's some very serious Presbyterians, very serious particular Baptists, Episcopalians, Methodists, like they certainly exist. But I think if you're looking at the majority, you might reasonably be able to say, well, this is disappointing. Now, the problem there is that, as much as one of us, not me, likes to take pot shots at the PCUSA, there are conservative Orthodox PCUSA churches out there, but there's such a non-majority. And so we have to say, when we're talking about a denomination, we have to say, okay, what qualifies the denomination as dead? Is it percentage of churches? Is it just a vibe? What if it's like a dead denomination, but there's a good congregation, or a dead denomination, dead congregation, but like a few good men and women? What are we, at what point do you say? And it's hard because no one wants to be, thinking of themselves as being the last survivors there. They want to be prideful, but so, they can be dicey, but at the same time, when you have large scale adoption and pushes for things that are against the Bible, I can see it. Particularly, it would be easy for an outsider to say, well, it seems pretty dead to me.
Yeah. So that actually moves us into like I want to say the bread and butter of what we were going to be talking about, and like what qualifies for a denomination to be dead. And you can give your piece in a minute.
Yeah.
In a second. For me, I think the biggest qualifier for what I would consider a denomination to be dead, without moving to doctrine and what they think about Scripture, is attendance inside the church versus versus who they actually have on their rosters, percentage wise. So we're specifically talking about organizationally what a dead church would look like. And I would say a church that doesn't see, like, let's say 20% of who it actually has on their email lists and everything, if they don't even meet 20% of that in terms of like its financial stability and what the church can do physically, it would quote unquote be dead because it can't really support itself without, because a lot of churches, especially within the Protestant community, are funded by the congregation. They're not necessarily funded by like huge overarching organizations like the Catholic Church does. Like the Catholic Church wastes money into parishes that are in the middle of nowhere. Now, mind you, that parish may sit on that money for Lord knows how long, but the Catholic Church still feeds money into it, and the same with the Eastern Orthodox Church, and I think the Anglican Church does it too. But because majority of Protestantism misses that huge level of structured organization, they just don't have it. They don't have the money to really do a lot. Like let's take the PCUSA for an example. Normally they're responsible for doing 250 missions a year, just about. But their number this year, as of 2021, had dropped down to 70 because of how many congregations weren't able to produce enough people or had so many COVID restrictions in the state that people just weren't going to church.
Wow. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big drop.
So in order for a church to go from 240 to 250 missions a year to 70 is, in terms of like the business world, a drop like that is phenomenal. Like it does not normally happen unless you have,
and it's like an over 50% drop is a big deal.
Yeah.
I have to go to business school to know that.
Yeah. But it's kind of crazy because the PCUSA has essentially had this coming for a while. If you think about it retrospectively, with, bad doctrine, liberalization, and even with the good churches out there, funneling the misappropriation of church funds, really, for projects that shouldn't have been going on, in my opinion.
I don't keep that close tab. PCUSA spending habits.
Anyway, that's just in terms of organization. Before we get to doctrine and everything, I think that's what would constitute a physically dead church. So, what's your piece on this?
Well, that's a good question. I sort of would have to almost, look at negatives of what I would consider to be a vibrant, healthy church. So if we look at passages like Titus 2, 1 Corinthians 5, Romans 12, and what I think is Colossians 3, just in general, we look at how the Bible describes healthy churches. It's people that are present, that are discipling one another, that are letting, they're committing their whole lives to serving Jesus, that are growing in faith, mentoring one another, holding each other accountable for sin. So I'd say any church that's not doing those things as a matter of course or habit, is either dead or dying. And so if you have a church, I think showing up is this very low baseline that I don't, I guess, if no one shows up, it's a dead church because there's not even an assembly there. But I think if you have a church where people, only show up on Sundays, well, that's kind of dead. If it's a church where people's lives aren't really being affected by the gospel and its implications, that's not really a good church. If people are not in each other's lives, doing all the one another's that you hear about in the Bible, then that sounds like a dead church to me. And so ultimately, if it's not a group of people pursuing Christ together and spurring one another on to righteousness, then whatever else they may or may not be doing, that sounds like a dead church to me.
Yeah.
Now, if they're trying to get there, that's another thing. There's immature churches too, but if it's a church that isn't there, doesn't particularly want to go there, isn't headed in the right direction, it sounds dead or dying to me.
Yeah. And so that's basically the spiritual outline or the biblical outline for what a dead church should be. Mm-hmm. And notice, I would say, notice how it's focusing on the individual church and not necessarily the denomination itself.
Sure.
Because of course, whenever we look at Rome as Reformed, we can say it's kind of dead because of just because of rampant idolatry within basically worshiping the saints. Of course, they wouldn't say that.
Dead would be quite a bit kinder than what some people would say.
Dead is kinder than what I would normally say.
And I think that there is this thing where if you know what a dead congregation looks like. I do think when you move to the denominational level, it's hard to know that kind of thing at a denominational level. It's hard to say. I think at the denominational level, you do have to start looking more at the sort of like what congregations like that would produce, which does tend to be bad doctrine and bad social statements. And so, maybe I don't know if such and such denomination, if people are showing up, if people are working in each other's lives, but if whatever they're doing is leading to the denomination embracing, just whoring out to the world whenever possible, I can, I would say, well, that doesn't sound like individual congregations are doing well. This sounds like this denomination is on ice right here.
I think one good example of that would actually just be how far the Methodist Church has dropped. Because if you look at the Methodist Church in terms of its attendance, in terms of its doctrine, and we're not talking, I think it's like United Methodist or the United Methodist Communion. That's that's the super liberal one, or exact verbiage there. Their church has experienced massive isolations in their church communities, where basically the people attending are probably only attending that church because they've been attending it for 40, 50 years, and they just don't know how to find a new church. Or maybe it's because they know that the United Methodist Church, in its desperation to appeal to a younger audience, to make the gospel palatable, or to make, compromises with, the sin of the day, essentially, just to try and get people in so they don't go under, like financially or in terms of attendance. So I think I would say from there, the perfect example is the United Methodist Church, because the United Methodist Church used to be one of the largest denominations in the United States. Mm-hmm. Like I think as of back in 2012, the United Methodist Church was the largest church in North America.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah. I believe it's the second largest association next to the Southern Baptist Convention. And they had a big vote in 2019 where they were much stricter on LGBTQ plus issues. And that was largely, though, due to the Filipino and African delegates. The U.S. primarily went the other way on that. And so now they're in talks for a split. So see what happens there.
Yeah, so that's also one thing that's been super big in the Methodist Church recently, is the fact that it's kind of acting like shattered glass hitting concrete.
The Methodist formerly known as United.
Yeah, the Methodist formerly known as United has now entered a civil war. Mm. Anyway, but I remember, so before I became a Presbyterian, I was a Methodist. Mm-hmm. I was also non-denominational, but we don't talk about that time in my life because that was a very, very weird time in my life.
I'm seeing a downwards trend in your denominational adherence, Dennis.
So there is a level of downwards trend because it used to be I started off as a Methodist, and I wasn't that great of a Methodist. I kind of grew up in that church. I was like super comfortable in that church because we had a Calvinistic pastor.
Okay.
Like our bishop, I grew up with the bishop of the diocese in our area.
Sure.
He was a Calvinist. Like he grew up Dutch Reformed, I think.
Wow.
If I remember right. Yeah. Then somehow he became a Methodist. Don't ask me. I think he read George Whitefield at least once. Anyway, he goes from this. I go from this Methodist church that was United Methodist, and my dad doesn't want to attend anymore. Or of course, me being like 6. I don't know why. Doesn't want to attend anymore, so we go to a different church. No, I wasn't 6. I was 12. No, 13. I was 13.
Sounds made up at this point, Dennis.
Sounds made up. I'll take pictures. I will show you. I will show you baby pictures.
When you were 12?
When I was 6, I got pictures ranging from when I was like 2 to when I was 6 in church, or not 6.
Yeah. But you left the church, is the bottom line.
Yeah, bottom line, I left the Methodist church because, my dad wasn't feeling comfortable with the direction it was going, and that Methodist church that we went to ended up splitting from the United Methodist Church. Of course, that church was in the middle of small town USA, so like the overarching Methodist church really didn't care about it, really didn't care about that property until they found oil under it. Anyway.
Oil.
You mean to say churches care about earthly possessions? Oh dear.
Whenever I hear the word oil, all I can think of is either those like memes of like America invading place, like like any level of oil, and like you just see the troops rushing in, or the old Dave Chappelle skit Black Bush.
Have you seen? Did you hear? Tony got a new thing of olive oil. And all you can hear in the background is Star Spangled Banner as tanks start running down the highway.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, United Methodists. You think you'd say they're a dead denomination? Is that what you're getting at here?
I would say the United Methodist Church is, because its end result has led to massive fracturing within the church that the denomination itself is not recognizable as a denomination anymore. And this kind of goes to how I would view dead denominations, and that's how they fracture. Like what we saw with the PCUSA wasn't necessarily dying. We just saw 2 or 3, actually 4 major organizations split off from the PCUSA, and that was the ECO, the Evangelical Covenant Order, the OPC, which technically broke off before most of the other denominations broke off. The PCA and the ECO. No, EOC.
There's an EPC.
EPC, that's what I was thinking. EPC broke off. So you have these 4 major denominations that broke off from the PCUSA, or churches that left the PCUSA to join these churches. All right, but we didn't see a massive fracturing as we're seeing with the Methodist Church. So I don't believe that and some massive people are going to disagree with me on this. I don't believe the PCUSA has completely died. It's basically on that path if it keeps, spearheading towards the wrong direction. But it can be saved if the good churches remain good churches and the Lord blesses them, because that's a major part in this, is that God looks upon the churches that are still faithful to him, and he looks at them and says, let's increase, let's bless you and become larger, essentially. So I would say that the PCUSA as a whole.
Pay attention tomorrow.
Yeah.
This room gets cleaned.
Okay.
I mean, like your barrack room,
Okay.
clean.
Okay.
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 But if I said,
Clean it like it's my barrack room. Okay. Anyway. But I think I kind of got the point across that in order for a denomination to be dead, it basically doesn't look like a denomination anymore. I think your camera froze, Dale. Oh, never mind.
Oh,
It froze at like the worst face too. You're kind of like,
yeah. Well, it's hard. I think it's much easier and somewhat useful to talk about a congregation being dead than a denomination.
yeah.
And maybe that's partly an ecclesiastical difference between us. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's, in the end, a denomination is an association, right? So, it's okay. Well, is this association helpful? Is it useful? Is it affiliating you with, the kind of Christians or kind of people you want to be associated with? And as that answer increasingly becomes no, then I think that's, just like, well, the reason is no, because we're dealing with a lot of dead churches. So yeah, ultimately, you can have a church that's dead because it's just not doing stuff, or because it's actively doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, it's, you deal with, if you're in a denomination that you fear maybe in its death throes, you have to make decisions. Do you split off and make a smaller one? Do you try to redeem the existing one? And some of those answers do depend on your overall ecclesiology. Like, do you need to be part of an episcopate or a presbytery or a synod? Can you go independent and just associate, as needed? Do you need apostolic succession? What are your qualifications that you understand, both to be part of the Church Catholic in the general sense, like what qualifies, and also just what qualifies a congregation to be, a meaningful, like different than just a couple of buddies hanging out, and that is going to be heavily dependent on your ecclesiology.
Yeah, and this kind of gets me to the last point that I had offer here. I think it is a bit ridiculous to look at a generalization of a denomination.
Mhm.
Like whenever Pastor B said Presbyterian denomination, he clearly meant all Presbyterians.
Yeah.
Like that's what his end goal was. I personally find it extremely foolish to look at all Presbyterians and say that all of them are dead.
Right. Well, that is a bit silly.
I think it's silly. I think it's past silly. I think it's foolish to do so, because and this is just kind of a problem with IFB churches in general. They're kind of like my way or no way.
Yeah.
In a way. So to me, it's extremely foolish to actually do that, because one, I believe it shows like a level of pride you have that probably shouldn't be there. And again, he sees this video, he's probably gonna call me out on pride. But
well, they can both be true, Dennis.
They both can be true. I have been known to be kind of boisterous.
Well, and sort of the advantage of the Baptist. Well, if we ignore the Bible for a moment and think purely pragmatically, which is always a great idea, the advantage of the Baptist model would be that you don't have to be associated with any congregation that you don't think is a good person to be associated with. So there is no,
Yeah.
I'm part of this presbytery, and like these three congregations are awesome. This screwball liberal one over here is messing my groove up, right? None of that.
Yeah.
However, if you it can also encourage, excessive sectarianism, where you look at other people that, disagree with you, and you may make those divisions wider than they ought to be. And, you do it in a different way than someone who's part of a group would do that. So ultimately, if we're thinking pragmatically, we can see that there's a chasm on either side of the tightrope with what we're doing. So then it's a matter of, okay, well, what's the biblical setup here, and how should we biblically be thinking about people, whether they're in our denomination or in our association, out of it? How do we think about potential brothers and actual brothers that disagree with us?
Yeah. So I think so going to my last I said last time, but going further into this last point,
Mhm.
I think that if we want to look at the activity of a church, what a church does, and sort of form a hypothesis from there, the Presbyterian Church as a whole is not the church you want to kind of point out for that. Maybe the PCUSA you can, but Presbyterians as a whole, it's kind of a bad example too, because let's take the PCUSA,
which is the biggest Presbyterian denomination in the U.S.
Yes, more than, and this is still into 2021 and post-COVID, still maintains over 300 missions across the world.
Sure, I will say, so I think if you're saying, well, I think there's different arguments you make for different things. If the idea is something like Calvinists don't evangelize, you can say like, well, no, here's a gazillion missionaries that we've had now and historically, right? That's obviously true. Now, the thing is, well, I'm not, and that I think is refutation of that hyper Calvinist accusation. But the question is, are they preaching the gospel? Well, then just listing them doesn't necessarily prove it. There's plenty of, and New Apostolic Reformation type groups that have a ton of missionaries that are not spreading the gospel, that are spreading, at best, prosperity nonsense out there. There's plenty of, I guess there's Mormon missionaries and Jehovah's Witnesses. So having, so just, if you want to talk to her, I can filibuster, Dennis.
No, go ahead.
So just having bodies there doesn't necessarily mean it's not a dead denomination or that it's a faithful church, but it does mean that it's not. If the simple question is, well, are they even making an effort to win souls, to use his language, then the answer can be, well, yes, it seems like they are, regardless of the quality of those soul winners.
Okay. He gets me like super paranoid right now. I am on the end of my tail. Anyway, yeah, I can see that viewpoint, and I understand where you're coming from. I don't know. For me, it's just very irritating for denominations as a whole to be generalized like that. Of course, now whenever we look at biblically, in terms of what is doctrinally dead, of course, we would say any church that takes its attention away from Christ as the center, would doctrinally be a dead church. And any church that does that, we can immediately see the repercussions of replacing Christ with something else. Like, let's take everyone's favorite example. Let's take the Roman Catholic Church, where they have replaced Christ alone with Christ and works. And all of a sudden they have this super dogmatic doctrine that, hell, if you don't believe one of the Marian dogmas, you're straight to purgatory, or straight to hell in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a dogma of the church.
It is infallible.
Of course. Because being wrong doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, yes, you'll get no argument from me there. It's there is and I think there is a difficulty that a lot of people have, and this is a conversation that is sort of well, how far from truth can you stray before you're too far gone? Like, what is the dividing line of faith? And I don't like those kinds of conversations generally, because that shouldn't be our goal, to see how close to the edge we can get it. Like, to what end? So we can marry the hot girl because she's just not unchristian enough, so we can really, so we can why are we looking for something borderline? We should be encouraging people to the center. And if it's something that's that close to the edge anyway, there's probably want to be warned against that. Now, that said, I think if someone, thinks that they're going to be able to improve their place before God through their own works, in the same sense that Jesus did, if they think that they're borrowing merit from other Christians throughout history, if they worship food, if they pray for intercession, from the dead, at a certain point, it does sound an awful lot like a religion that's not my own.
Yeah.
So like, well, there's a difference between not knowing a darn thing about baptism, and like being a totally different religion. So I feel like if we step back and I sort of gave vague descriptions of like Anglicanism, I'd be like, well, that sounds like more or less like what I believe. I think there's like, I probably phrase some things differently and I wouldn't emphasize X, Y, and Z. And, that's wrong. But overall, that sounds like it. Whereas at a certain point, if I start describing, stuff like, I think the trap people get in is they have like 3 pet doctrines. And if those pet doctrines are there, like, oh, well, then this is a real church. And like, who are we to say anything bad? So let's, like, the Bible doesn't say like, oh, well, if you, ascribe to you give lip service to the Trinity and you whatever, you baptize people and you use the word Jesus, then you're a church. Like, that's not what it says at all. You have false brethren, in Galatia that, they're not criticized for denying Christ. They're not criticized for being not Trinitarian, or for not baptizing, or, any of the things we think about. They're criticized for like a relatively, for basically asking people to follow a set of rules that, like, by and large, like, a lot of them overlap with what Christians are supposed to do anyway.
Yeah.
But because they're doing it from the wrong place of ultimately mixing covenants, which ultimately denies the sufficiency of Christ and what he's done, they are false brethren. So, I think there is a danger to just saying like, oh, well, if your baptism has Trinitarian formula, it's fine. Or, this church, they say the name Jesus, that's fine.
Which that actually makes me want to ask you a question. That last sentence makes me want to ask you a question when we're done, because we hit 40 minutes, and I only planned for this to be 40 minutes long. I didn't plan for this to be too long.
Sure.
This episode, because it's relatively a quick and simple, quick and easy rebuttal and presentation of what we would believe to be a more biblical way of analyzing a dead denomination. So let's just give a quick rundown of churches you would believe are quote unquote dead.
Oof.
Just to rile up the internet.
That's good. I mean, I think that denomination wise, and again, like with all the caveats, like there can be good churches and people within congregation and stuff. I think basically any denomination that starts with the word united is in pretty bad straits at best.
Thinking about that, I'm inclined to agree with you, because the United Congregationalist Church is awful right now.
Yeah. So, and I think, so those, and I guess that there is like a point where, like, for example, I wouldn't even list the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a dead church. I'd say that's just a different religion. Like, it's not even people, paying lip service to following Christ. It's like, no, like, this is totally different. So, I don't know enough about the Orthodox Church to comment heavily on it. But my understanding is there are basically in Europe, it is a lot of dead church type vibes. Whereas in the US, there's actually a much more vibrant community and practice there. And so, you can have things like regional deadness and aliveness there. But I don't know enough about it as a whole to say like, oh, they're not Christians or whatever else. That's just my understanding of them. Which is limited because I don't interact with a ton of Orthodox people, although I live near Orthodox Church. So, and then beyond that, we could say the usual type suspects. I said everything that starts with United. That's a big one. I think the Episcopal Church is, also not in good straits. And the Anglican Church, I think the Anglican Church is in better straits. Anglican Church is definitely hashing it out right now, but it really seems to be much like the Methodist and the Episcopal Church. Well, Methodist Church dividing itself on geographic lines, where you get the African and Filipino episcopates doing, I think that's what they're called, being much more, hardline Orthodox, whereas you have the European and even U.S. Sees not. But that said, there are totally legitimate Episcopal churches. There are totally legit Anglican churches. So I'd say they're, it's hard to say. I'm not someone that is like that intent, and I think a lot of times, like you'll get a church, you'll just get like false churches, like Lakewood, or Bethel. Things or churches that are at the very least like highly sus on many levels, like Elevation.
I would say in most cases that includes a lot of non-denominational churches just in general, because
I don't know.
my thing. So I've attended my fair share of non-denominational churches, and most of them, from memory that I recall, it's kind of like just paying lip service to Christ. Like there's one here in our town, Stonegate Church, and that one kind of like makes me reel back a bit, because they seem to be more worried about selling merchandise to teenagers, selling the idea of Christ, and not necessarily who he is. Like I remember talking with one of the pastors there about, what if this church is non-denominational, what is it y'all believe, just so I have a general idea of if this church is a biblical church or not.
Sure.
And my first question, of course, this was in my cage stage. This was when I was in a cage stage. Mm-hmm. So my first question was, was actually a sola fide question, was, do y'all affirm faith alone? Do y'all affirm sola scriptura? And immediately they were like, well, we try not to be divisive on this. And I was like, divisive on sola fide. It's kind of the point of the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah, it could be.
But for me, it was like, yeah, no, if they're not gonna like outright, either, I would much prefer if they just said they either denied it or they taught it. I'd much prefer if it was a definitive instead of a maybe. And I think that's one thing that we didn't mention tonight is reluctance in a church.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge issue in a lot of churches, and the reason why people aren't attending them is because a lot of churches today have become reluctant to put a position down, whether it be because of communal backlash from their immediate community, or it be from losing a lot of their attendance.
Yeah.
And those are perfectly reasonable worries, but I don't think those worries really, create a larger problem than what is, being true to what your position is. Like I remember one time walking into this is when I was in Vermont. By the way, everyone, Vermont is a very weird state. So if you go there and you go to a church, don't be surprised if you walk into like a Presbyterian church and there's a bishop there. Don't be surprised. It's a very weird state. But it's like the entire state constantly lives on whatever Austin smokes.
Oh gosh. Well, go on, Dennis.
Yeah. So I walked into I think it was a Baptist church. It was a Reformed Baptist church, specifically, I think 18 it was the London Baptist Confession, 1865?
There's 1689 and then
1689. Yeah, it was 1689. I walked in there, I was like, okay, just a quick question, what's your view on sola fide? Just general question, because that's usually the first question I ask a pastor.
Sure.
Just to to me, from I don't know why, it's just the first question I always ask.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like one of the most important questions to me.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he sits there, and he's like, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
I was like, yeah, not chief. Sorry, doc. I gotta go. And this was on a Saturday too, so it wasn't on a Sunday.
Night, Mom. Good night.
Anyway,
Night, Dennis.
anyway, I think that's the last bit of that.
All right.
For dying or dead denominations. So, and we left it on the idea of reluctance. I think that's a kind of a good measure. I think that's actually probably one of the most important measures to leave it on. Is the church reluctant to take a stance on something important?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, everyone, I hope you all have a fantastic night and that this 50 minutes was able to bring you some things to think about and maybe some things to pray about and maybe influences you to go read your Bible more.
Yeah.
That's the primary.
Family life, and that's always a joy.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, if you want to know what a good church or a bad church looks like, read your Bible and see what they command and what they praise and what they condemn.
Absolutely. And now with that, I hope we all get to see all of you again sometime. This is the Captain Calvinist and Dale Jutu signing out.